Make sure your lawmakers know that you want the research you pay for to be untainted by ideology, citizens. Yes. Yes. Make sure your lawmakers know this. And actually, this is actually a pretty great idea. Okay, so I was not expecting the video that I did last on Dorian Abbot's saga with MIT to be as popular as it was, but I'm back with a tiny update on that. Following the whole issue, Dorian himself, Professor Abbot himself, wrote a piece, and Barry Weiss published it on Substack, detailing some of his concerns and things going on here, and he says it with a lot of grace, actually firmly, but with a lot of grace, and I applaud him for it. And so I wanted to read through his remarks, give you my added take on top of it, and then I also encourage you, if you are a fan of free speech and viewpoint diversity, I will encourage one other thing while I'm here. So let's see. MIT abandons its mission and me. Let's make sure my cancellation is the last. That begins by standing up and saying no to the mob. I could not agree more, Professor Abbott, and that's why I'm often here on this channel nowadays, is I am highlighting professors like you who stand up and say no, and encouraging others to do so. And I'm often standing up and saying no myself. I am a professor who just had a prestigious public science lecture at MIT canceled because of an outraged mob on Twitter. My crime, arguing for academic evaluations based on academic merit. This is the story of how cancellation is carried out, why it should worry all of us, and what we can do to stop this dangerous trend. I'm going to put a full stop right there. I am thrilled that straight out of the gate, you're saying you're going to tell us some suggested solutions at the end. Bravo, sir. I approve. I have been a professor in the Department of the Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago for the past 10 years. I work on topics ranging from climate change to the possibility of life on extrasolar planets using mathematics, physics, and computer simulation. Just as a side note, myself, eventually, I hope to eventually talk to Professor Abbott on professional stuff and not on this kind of topic because of my own work dealing with climate modeling. So I'd be tickled to have a chance to chat with you at some point. I have never considered myself a political person. For example, a few days before an election, I go to isidewith.com and answer the policy questions and then assign my vote using a weighted draw based on my overlap with the candidates. It's an efficient algorithm that works perfectly for a nerd like me. Before I started to get alarmed about 5 years ago, as I noticed an increasing number of issues and viewpoints becoming impossible to discuss on campus. I mostly just wanted to do my science and not have anyone yell at me, and I thought that if I kept my mouth shut, the problem would eventually go away. I knew that speaking out would likely bring serious reputational and professional consequences, and for a number of years, I just didn't think it was worth it. But the street violence in the summer of 2020, some of which I witnessed personally in Chicago, and the justifications and dishonesty that accompanied it, convinced me that I could no longer remain silent in good conscience. Admittedly, this is actually where I'm at, too. I have noticed the same thing for my own campus, where I work, that it is increasingly difficult to discuss these things, to discuss many of these things, without being labeled as something. And so it's not a surprise anymore. I'm really not surprised by it, and I honestly thought the same thing for a long time too. Actually, that you could keep quiet about it and it would just blow over. It doesn't do that. The sort of wokeism here doesn't do that. They go for everybody. You either are with them or you are against them. That's the way it is. There's no kind of neutral middle ground with the wokish. Although I'm trying to think of whether or not no, I won't go there. I won't go there. That's a topic for another time, maybe on locals. Let's see. In the fall of 2020, I started advocating openly for academic freedom and merit-based evaluations. I recorded some short YouTube videos in which I argued for the importance of treating each person as an individual worthy of dignity and respect. In an academic context, that means giving everyone a fair and equal opportunity when they apply for a position, as well as allowing them to express their opinions openly, even if you disagree with them. Agreed. That's where I'm at with that, too. Where I have always been. As a result, I was immediately targeted for cancellation, primarily by a group of graduate students in my department. Whistleblowers later revealed that the attack was partially planned and coordinated by the Ford Foundation Fellowship Program listserv by a graduate student in my department. Please do not attack this person or any of the people who attacked me. Again, I agree with that sentiment too. I getting into personal vindictive attacks with people, I don't approve of it. Don't go after anybody physically. Don't dox. Don't do any of that. Here, don't go after people like that. That is unhelpful. Well, not just unhelpful. I mean, don't engage in the doxing and things like that. Don't do it. It's not right. And the Ford Foundation Fellowship Program, I am not surprised. I have heard some really nasty things about the Ford Foundation Fellowship Program and the coordinated campaigns that they've engaged in harassing people who disagree. I have heard that many times now over in here, and so it's kind of disgusting there. That group of graduate students organized a letter of denunciation. It claimed that I, quote, that I threatened the, quote, safety and belonging of all underrepresented groups within the department, end quote, and it was presented to my department chair. The letter demanded that my teaching and research be restricted in a way that would cripple my ability to function as a scientist. A strong statement in support of the faculty free expression by the University of Chicago President Robert Zimmer put an end to that, and that is where things stood until the summer of 2021. I recall that incident actually last year. And actually, I think I was one of the, I remember that. I was one of the co-signers when the Academic Freedom Alliance and a bunch of others put around the petition demanding that the president keep Professor Abbott. I remember that. So I was involved. I was there. I signed that petition myself. On August 12th, a colleague and I wrote an op-ed in Newsweek in which we argued that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as it is currently being implemented on campus, quote, violates the ethical and legal principle of equal treatment and, quote, treats persons as merely a means to an end, giving primacy to a statistic over the individuality of a human being. We proposed instead a, quote, alternative framework called merit, fairness, and equality, whereby university applicants are treated as individuals and evaluated through a rigorous and unbiased process based on their merit and qualifications alone. We noted that this would mean an end to legacy and athletic admissions advantages which significantly favor white applicants. That is true. I would be all for ending legacy and athletic admissions advantages too. Get rid of it. Shortly thereafter, my detractors developed a new strategy to try to isolate me and intimidate everyone else into silence. They argued on Twitter that I should not be invited to give science seminars at other universities and coordinated replacement speakers. This is effective and increasingly common way to ratchet up the cost of dissenting because disseminating new work to colleagues is an important part of the scientific endeavor. This is very true. This is very true. This has to do with communality and organized skepticism, in which you open up your work to critique by others via conferences, publishing, you don't just open up your work to critique by others, you're sharing your knowledge that you've gained with your research and others, with others, and so you end up then going to conferences and presenting all over the place. Sometimes you're invited to talk at different universities, as Professor Abbott was for MIT, and all the rest. And that's important to get your work out there to say, hey, look what I discovered, and let's talk about it and debate it and critique it and all this kind of good stuff that we're supposed to be doing as a scientist. But you cannot do that if someone shuts you down because you dissented on something that was unrelated. And this is the fascinating thing to me, is what have you in here is it's unrelated stuff that they targeted him over. They did not target him over the quality of his work, which I've read some of his stuff. The quality of his work is great. So I'm particularly stung by this because, of course, this is again why I've argued that a lot of the wokish stuff is completely anti-science, because there is the argument there that is made quite a lot of times. If you disagree with me, you are therefore, you are therefore evil, and what have you, ends up tending to happen in the woke sphere, and so it justifies shutting down anybody who disagrees with you, rather than having the debate and the argument. And fortunately, that is really detrimental, as he points out, for scientific endeavors and for the progress of your career as a scientist. If you cannot, because people don't like your opinion on something, if you cannot get out there and actually present on your work, it's really detrimental for your career. Sure enough, this strategy was employed when I was chosen to give the Carlson Lecture at MIT, a major honor in my field. It is a It is an annual public talk given to a large audience, and my topic was, quote, climate and the potential for life on other planets. On September 22nd, a new Twitter mob composed a group of MIT students, postdocs, and recent alumni demanded that I be uninvited. It worked, and quickly. On September 30th, the department chair at MIT called to tell me that they would be canceling the Carlson lecture this year in order to avoid controversy. In other words, MIT caved. It was absolutely cowardly. I said it last week, and I say it again. It was absolutely cowardly for MIT to cave. It's worth stating what happened again. A small group of ideologues mounted a Twitter campaign to cancel a distinguished science lecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology because they disagreed with some of the political positions the speaker had taken. They were successful within 8 days. The fact that such stories have become an everyday feature of American life should do nothing to diminish how shocking they are and how damaging they are to a free society. The fact that MIT, one of the greatest universities in the world, caved in so quickly will only encourage others to deploy the same tactic. Never bend the knee. Never bend the knee to the mob. It's really what it is. Never, ever, ever, ever bend the knee, because you are only inviting them to demand more concessions of you. They are only ever inviting you to demand, you're only ever inviting them to demand more concessions of you if you bend the knee to them and just appease them the first time. They will never be satisfied. Don't bend the knee. It has become fashionable in some circles to claim that, quote, cancel culture is just holding people accountable. I challenge you to read the material that led to the attacks against me and find anything that would require me being held accountable. What you will find is instead is the writing of a man who takes his moral duty seriously and is trying to express concerns strongly but respectfully. You may agree with some of my positions and disagree with others, but in a free society they cannot be considered beyond the pale. I view this episode as an example, as well as a striking illustration of the threat woke ideology poses to our culture, our institutions, and to our freedoms. I have consistently maintained that woke ideology is essentially totalitarian in nature. It attempts to corral the entirety of human existence into one narrow ideological viewpoint and to silence anyone who disagrees. I believe that these features ultimately derive from the ideology's abandonment of the principle of the inherent dignity of each human being. It is only possible to instrumentalize the individual in order to engineer group-based outcomes within a philosophical framework that has rejected this principle. Similarly, it is easy to justify silencing a dissenter if your ideology denies her individual dignity. Clearly, wokeism has not reached the terrible nadir of destruction yet, but the lesson of history is that we need to name and confront totalitarianisms before they cause disaster while it is still possible to do so. In agreement, again with that, I'm not going to disagree too much with Professor Abbot here because I really do agree with a lot of his sentiment. And I would add to it something else here. The abandonment of the principle of the inherent dignity of each human being. There was a video I did a while back on the idea of identity in the woke world versus the idea of actual, human identity in the classical liberal sense. And one of the things I talked about with that is, in that woke frame, you're not you. You're, in my case, for example, I'm not me to the woke. I am a woke, I am not woke, thank you, God, no. I am a white woman who is heterosexual, cisgendered, and all that kind of jazz. That's what I am. That's my identity to the woke. And the label that they give to me. And therefore they then presume that you're either privileged or oppressed based upon those kinds of things. I don't think they ever realize just how dehumanizing that is. To reduce someone just to their innate characteristics. And to a degree just how bigoted it is. Just outright bigoted it is. To reduce someone to say that their character, their experiences, everything about their life is defined by whatever race, sex, gender, what have you. That's what the woke do. And grouping those people off that way, it's remarkably dehumanizing because your identity is so much more than that. I put my identity in everything that I am, person you see here on the camera right now, and everything else that I am, all together it's encompassed by one thing, my name. My name is everything about my identity, which is why for me, I'm actually quite diligent about making sure I spell and pronounce a person's name right, is because that matters to me. That matters to me just matters as much as matters to somebody else. And it's like, and well, no, I won't get into that now, but the identity is so much more than all the different stupid things with race, sex, gender, what have you, that the woke just try and make it be. It is so much more than that, and it is utterly dehumanizing to be treated that way. And I have had that happen to me, where I have been treated, where I've been treated certain ways because of my race or gender or what have you, and it's utterly dehumanizing. And the woke people forget that, just how dehumanizing it utterly is. So I agree with that. This issue is especially important to me because my wife and I are expecting our first child in January. Well, congratulations, Professor. That is happy news. That is happy news, although I do understand your concern, even more so now. We all need to decide what type of country we want our children to grow up in. Do we want a culture of fear and repression in which a small number of ideologues exert their power and cultural dominance to silence anyone who disagrees with them? Or do we want our children to enjoy truth-seeking discourse consisting of good-natured exchanges that are ultimately grounded in a spirit of epistemic humility? If you want the latter, it is time to stand up and say so. It's time to say no to the mob, no to the cancellations. It's time to be forthright about your true opinions. This is not a partisan issue. Anyone who is interested in the pursuit of the truth and in promoting a healthy and functioning society has a stake in this debate. Speaking out now may seem risky, but the cost of remaining silent is far steeper. Exactly. This part of the reason I started this YouTube channel was because of that, is that I'm going to get out there and speak my mind, and whatever the woke say, whatever they may call me crazy, somebody may call me crazy, big deal. Big deal. Whatever. I don't judge my worth based on that. I have inherent dignity as a person. Benefit of individualism. Let's see. Thanks to Princeton professor and friend of common sense Robbie George, Dorian Abbot's canceled lecture will be hosted by the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions on the day it was scheduled to be given at MIT, October 21st at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will be free to the public via Zoom, and you can register at this link. We hope you will tune in. We'll get back to that in a second. By now, we have run many pieces about the epidemic of groupthink. Epidemic of groupthink and cowardice in higher education. Many of you are rightly wondering, what can I do? I asked Dorian for his advice. Here's what he recommended. For administrators, never give in to the mob. Rewarding bad behavior encourages more of it. You, more than anyone else, have the power to put an end to cancel culture by simply ignoring the demands of a mob. Be aware that it's easy to gather a large number of signatures for just about anything by revving up a Twitter mob, and that many of the signatories of letters of denunciation may have felt intimidated into signing. For faculty, cancellation tactics work by isolating the target and fostering an atmosphere of fear. You can help by joining together with others committed to academic freedom. I recommend organizations like the Academic Freedom Alliance, Hierdox Academy, and ACTA? I don't know what ACTA is. I'll have to go look at that. If you're ever tempted to join a cancellation mob, remember that you could be the next one on the chopping block. Yeah, just because you join in a mob doesn't mean they won't come for you eventually. Finally, get the Chicago Principles, the gold standard for academic freedom, and a statement insisting on political neutrality of the university, like the Calvin Report, adopted on your campus. I would very much like to see this adopted at every single university, like I said. Students don't participate in social media mobbings or sign letters of denunciation. Publicly encourage friends with dissenting viewpoints to speak out, whether you agree with them or not. Parents, take into consideration a university's commitment to academic freedom when you are helping your child decide which school to attend. Ask if the university has adopted the Chicago Principles. Consider the FIRE free speech rankings. Tell university officials that this is something that is important to you. Yes, parents, vote with your dollars. If a university engages in this kind of cancellation nonsense and they cancel a professor for a disagreement, don't send your kid there. Don't let your kid go there. You know? Don't do it. Don't give them the money. They'll respond when the green's gone. Alumni donors, tell your alma mater that freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, and academic freedom are supremely important to you. Ask what protections for free speech are in place and whether the school has endorsed the Chicago Principles. Make your gifts conditional. Stop giving if administrators do not robustly defend these principles. Again, the money. Take the money away from the universities and they will respond. Trustees, hold the administrators you appoint as responsible for upholding academic freedom. If they refuse, replace them. Lawmakers, add stipulations to funding for both public and private universities that require academic freedom and political neutrality to be strictly observed. That would be another way to do it. Make sure your lawmakers know that you want the research you pay for to be untainted by ideology. Citizens, yes. Yes. Make sure your lawmakers know this. And actually, this is actually a pretty great idea. I would actually love to see this. That it goes into the requirement of funding a university, if it gets public dollars, that they are required to defend academic freedom of everybody that's involved. Whether it's somebody that the legislature itself doesn't like or not, doesn't matter. So as was mentioned in here in the middle, we do have a lot of good news to result from this, in that Princeton professor Robbie George has decided to host Professor Abbott's lecture. And I'll be attending myself, actually, in my professional capacity. So I am looking forward to it. But you know what I would love to see? All of you out there who are lovers of free speech and academic freedom and viewpoint diversity, you can completely disagree with Professor Abbott and myself on anything else. But what I would love to see is to see so many people show up in support of Professor Abbott via Zoom. And the nice thing is you can do this via Zoom. So I'm going to, of course, have this in the description. I encourage you, even if you're not going to he's talking about climate and life on other planets. It's going to be fascinating for me. I'm looking forward to it. But I encourage you to go sign up for this and be there in support of him. In support of the right of this professor to speak freely and to show that we want academic freedom, we want free speech, and we will not bend to the mob. Have a large group of ourselves there to show this. I want to see the registration blow up with all these people who said they've had enough of people being canceled for their opinions on something. So I would love to see a huge number of folks in the public come to Professor Abbott's lecture on Zoom. So you got a couple of weeks. I'm going to try and remember. I'm going to remember to. I'm going to advertise it a few times. Actually, I saw Professor Abbott mention it himself on the news the other day. So I'm presuming he's okay with me pointing this out in here. But if not, please, Professor Abbott, if you end up seeing this and you don't want me to throw this advertisement for you, I will gladly not do that, and I will pull the video off. But anyway, that's it from me right now. Professor Abbott, again, I say you are a champion, and you have a lot more grace than I do with this. So I appreciate it. Appreciate your words of wisdom here for all of us on what to do when the woke come calling. That's it for now. If you liked the video, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. And until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious.